The Amazon rainforest looks endless from above, a vast green ocean breathing mist into the sky. From satellites and airplane windows, it appears uniform, an unbroken blanket of leaves. But deep inside, where maps fade into guesswork and the river bends no longer have names, lies a clearing almost no one reaches twice. In the center of that clearing stands a single, colossal tree. Its trunk is wide enough that an entire family could live inside it. Roots spread like sleeping serpents, vanishing into the dark soil, braiding around rocks and bones and forgotten seeds. Its crown reaches so high that the topmost leaves kiss wandering clouds, drinking from them as they pass. The people who still remember its name call it Ybá Kaîra, the tree that heals, the tree that connects heaven and earth, the shelter of spirits, the keeper of the forest's memory. This is the story of how a young woman found that tree and how the tree found her. Far from that green sea, in a city of concrete and exhaust, Elena sat on a balcony with her grandfather, as she had done since childhood. The balcony overlooked a noisy street clogged with cars and buses, the air trembling with horns and shouts and the distant hum of air conditioners. When she was little, she liked to imagine that the wind that reached them had once passed through the forest, carrying with it invisible fragments of leaves and rain. Her grandfather would sit in his old chair, a chipped mug of black coffee in his hands, eyes turned to the strip of sky squeezed between buildings. He was a quiet man, but when he spoke about the forest, something changed in his voice. It softened and deepened at the same time. "The forest is a book, Menina," he would say. "The problem is that most people forgot how to read." She grew up hearing pieces of his story. He had once been a matero, a forest guide, helping researchers, missionaries, and explorers navigate the labyrinth of rivers and trails. He knew trees by their bark and scent, animals by their tracks and calls, rivers by the way they twisted in the earth. He never bragged, but sometimes, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him murmur old names under his breath, as if counting friends he would never see again. One day, when she was about 10, she asked him directly, "Vo, why did you stop going?" His gaze drifted to some faraway place only he could see. For a moment his face looked younger, then older, all at once. "Because the forest showed me something I could not forget," he said, "and because I did something the forest could not forgive." He didn't say more. Years passed before she understood that he was not being dramatic, he was simply telling the truth. Time moved on. Elena grew up. She studied hard, driven by a vague but insistent feeling that her life should somehow circle back to that green ocean he described. While other kids filled their notebooks with drawings of skyscrapers and cars, she sketched leaves and rivers and strange roots that curled in spirals. When teachers asked what she wanted to be, she said, "A scientist," though inside she thought, "Someone who can read the book my grandfather talked about." By the time she finished university, the world was already deep in arguments about climate change, deforestation, and the future of the Amazon. Her degree in biology brought her to a research project cataloging medicinal plants in the forest, a race against time to discover what might be lost forever. There were meetings, grant proposals, debates over methods and impact. Between all of that, there were trips to small river towns, to edges of the forest where asphalt turned to dirt. On one of those trips, fate stepped forward. Her grandfather was already ill when she got the offer to join the project. He lay in a hospital bed, his once strong hands thin and trembling, the smell of disinfectant replacing the sense of soil and coffee that had always clung to him. Outside, rain hammered against the window, turning the city's lights into blurred streaks. She sat at his bedside and told him about the opportunity, the rivers she would travel, the plants she might find, the chance to help protect what remained. His eyes brightened, if only for a moment. "You're going back," he whispered, "back to where the book is still open." He seemed to drift after that, his thoughts slipping between past and present. One night, near midnight, his hand suddenly tightened around her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes, usually clouded now, were suddenly clear, focused directly on her. "Elena," he said, his voice rough but urgent, "there is a tree in the forest that remembers everything. It connects the sky to the earth. It heals. It shelters the spirits of those who lived and died under its branches. I guided men there once. I shouldn't have." She tried to calm him. "Vor, it's the fever. You should rest." "No," he insisted. "Listen to me. We found it by accident, or maybe it found us. The men I guided wanted to cut it, to study it, to own its secret. They talked about cures, about saving lives, about fame. I believed them. I thought we would take only a little. But you cannot take a little from something like that, Menina. You either come with respect or you come with a knife. And the tree knows the difference." A tear slipped from his eye and disappeared into the wrinkles on his cheek. "Promise me," he whispered, "if the forest ever calls you, really calls you, you will listen. You will go not to take, but to protect what I could not." Her throat closed. She wanted to tell him that trees don't call, that this was just a story, but the way his fingers dug into her skin told her that for him, it was not a story at all. "I promise," she said softly. He exhaled, a slow, long breath, as if releasing a weight he had carried for decades. 3 days later, he was gone. The world did what it always does in the face of grief. It kept moving. Papers had to be signed. Bills had to be paid. The research project started. Elena traveled to the forest's edge, then a little further in, always accompanied by teams, guides, and protocols. She interviewed traditional healers, recorded recipes and names of plants with care, collected samples under strict ethical guidelines. Yet as the months turned into years, something else crept into her life. It started as a feeling, vague and easily dismissed, a heaviness in the chest when she watched footage of burning forests, a strange pressure behind her ribs when she stood on a dock looking at a river disappearing into endless green. At night, in cheap guesthouse rooms by muddy ports, with the sound of frogs and distant music drifting through thin walls, she sometimes woke with the sense that someone had called her name from far away, in a voice made of leaves and wind. The forest is calling, she thought once, and it felt absurd. But the feeling didn't go away, it grew stronger. One sweltering afternoon, in a small river town whose streets turned to mud when it rained, she was sent to a local cultural center to look through their old records. They stored documents in a cramped, dusty room where the air tasted like mold and paper. As she flipped through boxes of yellowed reports and handwritten notebooks, a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth caught her eye. The label on it was almost illegible, ink faded by time, but she could just make out 2 words and a faint third. "Mapa avo." She froze. With careful fingers, she untied the cord and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a sheet of thick, rough paper. It wasn't a precise map with latitude and longitude. Instead, it was a drawing that captured how a forest feels rather than how it looks on satellite. Rivers curved across the page like veins, drawn in blue pencil. Small icons of animals marked certain spots, a jaguar here, a cluster of fish there. Trees were sketched in groups, each with notes beside them, names, uses, warnings. At the center of the map, a large circle had been shaded in green. In the middle of that circle, a single tree was drawn, simple but unmistakably tall, its roots stretching out like rays in every direction. Above it, in dark red pencil, a single phrase. Ybá Kaîra, não tocar. Ybá Kaîra, do not touch. The handwriting was his, her grandfather's. In the lower corner, nearly lost in a crease, were 2 more words, so faint she had to tilt the paper to the light to see them. "Me perdoa, forgive me." Elena's heart pounded. The air in the little archive room felt heavy, thick with dust and ghosts. She closed her eyes and saw his face in the hospital bed, heard his voice saying, "There is a tree that remembers everything." Here was proof that it wasn't just the fever speaking. He had drawn that map, he had found that tree, and he had regretted it deeply enough to hide the map and ask for forgiveness. She walked back to her guest house that evening as if in a dream, the map rolled and tucked into her backpack, pressed close to her body as if someone might try to take it. She lay awake most of the night, the ceiling fan clicking overhead, the distant sound of the river whispering outside. By dawn, the decision had ripened inside her like a fruit. She would follow the map, not for fame, not for scientific papers or awards, but because she had made a promise, and because the forest's call now felt like a steady drumbeat inside her chest. No one walks alone into the deep forest. You don't simply look at a map and march into the heart of the Amazon. You need someone who understands that the lines on a page are only half the story, that the forest itself decides which paths exist on a given day. In the small port where wooden boats rocked on brown water, the locals gave her one name. Iago, they said. He knows the rivers like veins, but he doesn't go just anywhere. The forest has to agree. She found him sitting at the bow of a long, narrow boat, repairing a fishing net. He was tall and lean, with skin the color of copper and black hair tied at the back of his neck. His hands moved with steady precision, fingers weaving and tightening the net. "You're Iago?" she asked. He glanced up, squinting against the sunlight. "Depends who's asking. My name is Elena. I'm a biologist. I'm looking for a place in the forest that isn't on any usual map." She hesitated, then unrolled the paper enough for him to see the central circle and the drawn tree. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The easy, almost playful look left his face. He set the net aside and reached for the map with careful fingers. "I remember this drawing," he said slowly, tracing the familiar curves of rivers. "I remember the man who made it. He came here years ago with questions and machines and eyes like someone who had seen more than he wanted to." "He was my grandfather," Elena said. Silence stretched between them. The river lapped against the wooden posts of the dock. A vulture crossed the sky, wings spread wide. "Why do you want to go there?" Iago asked. The answer rose from somewhere deeper than she expected. "Because I promised him. Because he died carrying a regret he couldn't fix. And because—" She paused, then decided she had nothing to gain from pretending. "Because the forest has been calling me. I feel it. I can't explain it in scientific language, but I feel it." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "Most people only hear the forest when they are lost," he said. "You hear it before you enter. That's unusual." He looked back down at the map, then out at the river, then at her again. Finally, he nodded once. "I'll take you part of the way," he said, "but there are places where my boat cannot go and paths I will not walk again." "Because of what happened with him?" she asked quietly. "Because some stories do not want to be repeated," he replied. They left the next morning at first light. The town shrank behind them, houses and antennas dissolving into mist. The river wrapped around bends, wide in some stretches, narrow in others, always reflecting the pale sky above. The boat's motor hummed steadily, a small mechanical heart beating against the vast living body of the forest. For days they travelled. Sometimes they passed other boats, fishermen, traders, families moving from one community to another. Other times the river was empty except for them and the occasional pink dolphin surfacing with a soft puff of breath. "Botos," Iago said once as two pale backs arched near the boat. "Some say they're spirits that become people at parties and steal hearts." "What do you say?" Elena asked. "I say the forest doesn't like to be alone," he replied, "so it makes company for itself in many forms. At night, they anchored near small sandbanks or at the edge of uninhabited banks, mosquito nets, campfires, stars scattered overhead, the sounds of the forest around them, frogs, insects, something large moving in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl. The air carried the smell of wet earth and leaves, of life constantly blooming and decaying and blooming again. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, Elena asked the question that had been sitting on her tongue since they left. "What happened when you went there with my grandfather?" He stared at the river, at the reflections of clouds on the surface. "We walked for days," he said at last. "Your grandfather, 2 other researchers and me. They had equipment, cameras, sample boxes, small machines that beeped and flashed. They spoke about miracle drugs, about curing diseases, about bringing wealth to the country and fame to their names. Your grandfather was different. He listened more. He looked around more. He asked the forest for permission, even if he didn't quite know how. He took a breath. But he still walked with them," Iago continued. "And when we reached the clearing, when we saw the tree, it was already too late to turn back." He didn't say more that night. The story would come in full later, when the time was right. For now, the river kept their secrets. On the 4th day, they left the main river and followed a narrower channel shaded by overhanging branches. The water here was slower, darker, littered with fallen leaves. Birds called from the depths of the foliage, flashes of bright color moving between the shadows. By mid-afternoon they arrived at a village hidden away from the obvious routes. Wooden houses stood on stilts above the water, connected by narrow walkways. Children stopped their games to stare at the boat. Dogs barked, tails wagging. Women paused their weaving, men their repairs. There was curiosity in their eyes, but also caution, the kind that comes from centuries of seeing strangers arrive with promises and leave with whatever they could carry. A tall woman stepped forward. Her hair was streaked with grey, pulled back from a faceline not just by age, but by sun and responsibility. Around her neck hung a necklace of seeds and a small carved charm shaped like a tree. "You are late," she said, but there was a hint of warmth in her tone. "The forest told us you were coming." "The forest told you?" Elena echoed. The woman regarded her with calm, penetrating eyes. "You must be Elena," she said, "daughter of Carlos, granddaughter of João, the one who made a promise." Elena's skin prickled. "How do you know my name?" "Your grandfather sat by our fire once," the woman said. "He told us about a granddaughter who loved books and asked too many questions. He spoke of his fear that she would inherit not just his love for the forest, but his guilt as well." She touched the charm at her neck. "I am Arazi, keeper of stories here, and keeper of something he left behind." The villagers welcomed them with a measured hospitality. Food was offered, fish wrapped in leaves, cassava, fruits that tasted like a mixture of citrus and sunlight. They gave Elena a hammock strung under a roof of palm leaves. Children hovered nearby, fascinated by her small recorder and notebooks. She let them touch the buttons, their fingers tentative, eyes wide when the device captured and played back their giggles. That night, the village gathered around a circular fire pit. Sparks rose into the dark, joining the stars above. The river muttered in the background. Elena and Iago sat close to the flames, grateful for their warmth. "You came because of Ybá Kaîra," Arazi said, her face half lit, half shadowed. "Before you walk any further, you must hear its story." Elena nodded. "Long before our grandparents' grandparents," Arazi began, "the sky and the earth were not as far apart as they are now. They were close, like 2 lovers resting against each other. There was no wind, no birds flying between them. People lived close to the soil in darkness, safe but blind to the stars. One day, a curious child grew tired of the darkness. He dug upward with his hands, pushing against the heavy sky. He made a crack just big enough for a ray of light to slip through. That light was the first dawn. The sky, surprised, lifted a little. The earth shivered. Between them a space opened. Into that space rushed air and wind and birds and insects and leaves. Life learned to stretch up and press down, but the sky and the earth still longed for each other. So the Great Spirit planted a tree that could touch both. Its roots went deep into the soil, drinking from the dark memory where every fallen leaf, every dead animal, every buried secret rests. Its trunk rose tall and strong. Its branches reached high enough to brush the sky. On its leaves, the light of stars rested. In its bark remained the breath of the earth. That was the first Ybá Kaîra, the tree between worlds. Spirits could move along it from sky to earth and back. The prayers of the living could travel faster to the heavens through its roots and branches, and the blessings of the sky could descend gently along the same path. For a while, people came with gratitude. They brought offerings of fruit and songs and promises. They touched its bark with respect, asking for guidance, healing, wisdom. The tree shared what it could. But humans are restless. Some wanted more. They began to strip pieces of its bark and roots to sell. They tried to store its power in jars and bottles. They argued about who owned the tree, who could decide who touched it. The tree grew weak. The Great Spirit spoke through its leaves. "I will not let you destroy my bridge. I will hide it where only those who come with humility and a heart carrying more questions than greed can find it." And so, to most eyes, the tree vanished. It moved into the deep heart of the forest where rivers whisper old names and where the footprints of ancestors still glow faintly in the soil. It woke again there, roots drinking from older memories, branches listening to older winds. Since then, it appears only to some. Those who come with knives and contracts see only another tree, or they get lost before they reach the clearing. Those who come only with curiosity, treating it as a spectacle, see it as a mirage, beautiful but unreachable. But those who come with a promise, a wound, and a willingness to listen, the tree may reveal itself. It heals, yes, it connects sky and earth, it shelters wandering spirits, but above all it remembers. It remembers the first time your people drank from its shade. It remembers every burned patch of forest, every broken promise, every song, every apology. It remembers your grandfather kneeling at its roots, begging for forgiveness. Elena's heart pounded again, like it had when she saw the words Ybá Kaîra, no tocar, on the map. "What happened when he went there?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Arachi turned her gaze to Iago. "He was there. He should be the one to tell you." Iago stared into the fire for a long moment, the dancing flames reflected in his dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of something he had carried alone for too many years. "We walked for days," he said, "your grandfather, 2 other men, and me. The forest was strangely quiet, as if it were watching us. Birds did not sing as loudly. Monkeys watched from a distance instead of shouting and throwing things like they sometimes do. Even the insects seemed to hum at a lower pitch. When we reached the clearing, I felt like I had stepped into another room in the same house, a room that is usually locked. The tree stood there, bigger than anything I had seen. Not just tall, but present. It felt like walking into a cathedral, but the walls and ceiling were made of leaves and light. The air smelled different, not just of soil and plants, but of something old, like the scent of rain that fell before we were born. Your grandfather stopped just inside the clearing. He took off his hat. He closed his eyes. I could see tears already on his cheeks. He whispered a thank you to the forest under his breath. One of the other men did not stop. He laughed. He said, "Do you realize what this means? We're going to be famous." He walked straight up to the tree and pulled out a knife. He wanted a sample of the bark, just a little piece, he said, for analysis. As soon as the knife touched the bark, the light changed. The sunlight dimmed like a cloud had passed in front of the sun. But when I looked up, the sky was clear. The leaves of the tree trembled, though there was no wind. The man's hand started shaking. The knife slipped. He cut his own palm. Blood fell onto the roots. The ground moved. Roots that had been still rose, thin as fingers, twisting around his ankles. He screamed. The other researcher rushed forward to help him and sank knee-deep into suddenly soft earth that had been firm a second earlier. Your grandfather shouted apologies into the air. He begged the tree, the forest, whoever would listen. I felt a pressure on my chest like someone pressing a stone into it. My vision blurred. And then the tree showed us things. I don't have better words for it. One moment I was kneeling on the ground, the next I was seeing fires in places I had never been to, trees falling in waves under machines, rivers turning brown with poison, animals lying still, children coughing in cities far away, the smoke of burned forests in their lungs. I saw men in suits drawing lines on maps as if they were cutting through flesh. I saw ancestors singing and weeping. I felt the pain of roots sliced, of leaves scorched, of soil scraped bare. I felt it from the inside, like my veins were roots and they were being torn out. The others screamed. One of them clawed at his head as if trying to tear the images out. Your grandfather, he cried like a child. He kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't understand." After what felt like hours or seconds, I can't tell, the ground hardened again. The roots let go. We were thrown backward, as if the forest itself had exhaled and pushed us away. One man never spoke again after that. He left the forest physically, but his mind stayed in that clearing. The other left research entirely. Your grandfather, he came back, but he returned with a wound in his soul. He told me later that the tree hadn't just punished him. It had trusted him with its pain. He could have returned with more men, with machines, with guns. He didn't. Instead, he came here. Iago nodded at Arachi. He gave her the map and asked her to hide it, to wait for you. The fire crackled. The night hummed with distant insects and nearby silence. "So why let me go?" Elena asked. "If the tree is that powerful and that dangerous, why help me reach it?" Arachi's gaze softened. "Because you are not going as a conqueror or a collector," she said. "You are going as someone who carries a promise and a wound that is not her fault, but still her responsibility. The forest told us she must be given a chance." The following morning, the village prepared them for the final leg of the journey. An old woman tied a braided bracelet around Elena's wrist, made of plant fibers dyed in subtle earthy colors. A small tree charm hung from it, similar to Arazi's. "This is not protection," the old woman said. "The tree sees through charms. This is just a reminder to you to walk with humility." A young boy handed Iago a small bundle of dried leaves and seeds. "Offerings for the spirits along the way," Arazi explained. "Respect is not just a word, it is action." They left the village on foot. The forest swallowed them, trunks rising like columns, vines draping from above. The canopy thickened, sunlight filtered down in thin, pale beams. The air became wetter, heavier, filled with the smell of life layered on life. After hours of walking, the path faded, until it was little more than a suggestion of disturbed leaves and slightly more open space between trunks. Finally, they reached a line of darker trees, their branches twisted together overhead, forming an archway. Thin roots hung in curtains from higher branches, creating a kind of living gate. "This is as far as I go," Iago said quietly. "Beyond this, you are in a place that does not want me again." "You're not coming?" Elena asked, suddenly afraid in a way she hadn't been on the river or in the village. "The forest has its own reasons," he said. He took her hand and placed a small carved pendant in her palm, a tiny boat. "If you come back, I will be here. If you don't, I will know the forest made a choice." Her mouth was dry. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know the right words, the right rituals." "Words are less important than the heart behind them," he replied. "You have that. Go." He stepped back. The roots hanging from the archway swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Elena swallowed, adjusted the strap of her pack, took a breath, and stepped through. The air on the other side felt different at once, colder, though still humid, thicker as if filled with invisible threads. The usual noise of the forest, chittering, calling, chirping, faded into a heavy hush. Each of her footsteps sounded too loud. The path unfolded slowly, not as a clear track, but as a sense of where to place her feet. It was like walking inside someone's slow-moving dream. The light filtering through the canopy overhead seemed brighter yet softer, as if filtered through water. Time lost its edges. Minutes stretched or collapsed. Her heartbeat became a drum in her ears. She felt watched, but not by eyes that meant harm, rather by something vast and ancient, curious about this small creature walking on two fragile legs. She stepped through a final row of trees, and suddenly the world opened. The clearing was a circle of open sky, surrounded by a dense ring of trees. At its center, rising from the earth as if it had grown since the beginning of time, stood Ybá Kaîra. Up close, it was even more overwhelming than she had imagined from Iago's description. The trunk was immense, textured with deep grooves and whorls that seemed to form patterns, spirals, waves, shapes that echoed shells, clouds, even fingerprints. The bark carried shades of brown, copper, and a faint metallic sheen, as if rivers of metal had frozen just beneath the surface. Roots radiated outward from the base, thick and sinuous, some diving deep into the earth, others arching over it like bridges. Fine hair-like roots hung from some of the thicker ones, brushing the soil like fingers. The trunk rose and rose and rose, until her neck ached from trying to see the top. The canopy was a vast, layered crown of leaves, deep green with delicate veins of gold that caught the light. Here and there, among the leaves, small fruits glowed with faint color, like distant lanterns. A strange calm fell over her. Fear melted into something else, reverence, awe, sorrow, and a fierce tenderness all mixed together. She did not walk up and touch the tree, not yet. Instead, she knelt just outside the ring of its closest roots, her knees pressed into the cool earth. "My name is Elena," she said, voice soft but steady. "I am Joan's granddaughter. I come with his regret, my curiosity, and a promise. I am not here to cut you. I am not here to take your bark or your sap. I am here to ask how I can help you heal what is wounded, in you and in everything connected to you." Her words fell into the quiet. For a moment, nothing changed. Then she felt a vibration under her knees, faint at first, like a distant truck passing somewhere underground. It grew gradually, not shaking the earth, but thrumming through it. It moved up into her bones, into her spine, into her chest. It was a heartbeat. Not hers. Something older, slower, spanning time with each pulse. Her own heart tried to match it and failed, racing ahead, then slowing, then racing again. She closed her eyes. The first memory rose not as an image, but as a smell. Smoke from a clean fire, mixed with the scent of roasted roots and flowers. Then images formed, not before her eyes, but behind them. She saw people gathered around a younger Ybá Kaîra. The tree was still enormous, but its trunk smoother, its canopy less dense. Men and women danced around a fire, bodies painted, faces lit by flickering light. Children ran in circles, laughter ringing across the clearing. Elders sat with their backs against the roots, singing. One woman approached the tree and pressed her forehead to the bark. She whispered, and though Elena did not know the words, she understood their meaning. "Let my son grow strong and kind. Let him remember his people, even if he travels far. Let him respect those who came before him." The memory faded. Another took its place. Smoke again, but different. Thicker, harsher, filled with the stench of burning oil and plastic. A stretch of forest burned in waves, bright orange eating through green. Machines roared, trees fell, roots exposed, leaves shriveling in heat. Men in helmets shouted over the noise. One laughed as a particularly large tree crashed down. "We'll clear this in record time," he shouted to another. "Soon this will be pasture, money in our pockets." From the edge of the scene, Ybá Kaîra watched, too far to be reached by the flames, for now. The smoke blew toward it. Animals fled past its roots, eyes wide with terror. The tree felt the heat, the choking air. Elena felt it too, not on her skin but in her chest. A burning pressure. More memories surged past. Not in neat order, but like currents colliding. Children playing and hiding between roots. A shaman painting symbols on the bark with red clay, singing to the spirits of the sky and the deep soil. A storm ripping branches from other trees while Ybá Kaîra held firm, sheltering birds and small animals within the folds of its roots. She saw her grandfather arrive, younger and stronger. He stepped into the clearing, eyes wide, hat in his hands. The awe on his face made her heart ache. Behind him came the two other men, their excitement sharp, hungry. "It's incredible," one said, staring up. "If half the stories are true, this could be worth billions." They set up equipment at the edge of the clearing. Cameras hummed, instruments flashed. Your grandfather, her grandfather, bent down and pressed his hand against a root, closing his eyes. She felt the whisper of his prayer. "Please let this be for good. Please let us not harm what we do not understand." The man with the knife approached the trunk, humming a tune under his breath. "Just a little sample," he said. "We'll be careful." Pain struck. Elena felt it as a blast of cold and heat simultaneously. The bark's outer layer parted under the metal. The man's palm slipped, and blood splashed on the root. The tree reacted like a body attacked. Roots rose, the earth went soft, the air thickened with something almost electrical. The forest's silence turned into a high, piercing note that rang through every leaf and stone. The images the tree had shown Iago and the others now rolled through Elena's mind. Fires, chainsaws, animals dying in traps, rivers clogged with dead fish, children drinking dirty water, the faces of men in cities far away signing papers that sealed the fate of places they would never see. She saw her grandfather on his knees, hands pressed to the soil, shouting apologies. "I am sorry, I didn't know," he cried. "Please let me fix this." She felt his guilt. It clung to him like a wet cloak for the rest of his life, heavy and cold. The tree had let them go. It could have kept them, swallowed them, crushed them. Instead, it allowed them to carry its pain back into their world. The visions shifted again. She now saw him in Arazi's village, older, more fragile. He sat by the fire, map in his lap. "If my granddaughter ever comes," he said, "tell her the truth. Don't make me a hero, don't make me a villain. Just tell her what I did and what the tree did. Maybe she will find a better way to stand before it." The memories slowly receded like a tide. The heartbeat beneath her knees faded back to its steady, distant rhythm. Elena opened her eyes. Tears had soaked her face, her neck, the front of her shirt. She felt emptied and yet more full than she had ever been. "You remember everything," she said aloud to the tree. "Every good thing, every terrible thing. You remember him. You remember what he did and what he tried to fix." She stood shakily, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and stepped forward until she was just at the edge of the largest roots. "I can't undo what happened," she said. "I can't promise that humans will stop hurting you. I can't even promise that I will always get it right. But I can promise this. I will not turn you into a product. I will not take your body apart and sell pieces of you in white bottles with neat labels. I will tell your story, and I will fight in the world of screens and papers and laws for you to be seen as more than a thing." A soft breath of wind stirred the leaves high above. One leaf detached and began to fall. It drifted slowly, spinning, catching light with each turn. She watched it like a small green comet descending. It landed gently near her foot. She crouched and picked it up with both hands. The leaf was unlike any she had seen. Its surface was deep green, veined with threads of pale gold that seemed almost to glow, not with the brightness of a lamp, but with the quiet warmth of a living thing. When she pressed it between her fingers, it felt slightly warm, as if it had just been illuminated by sunlight. Understanding flowed into her, not in words, but as a knowing. The tree was not offering her a miracle cure. It was not saying, "Take this, and you will solve all human sickness." It was offering her a memory, a connection, a symbol, a living piece of itself to carry back, not as loot, but as a reminder of the responsibility she now bore. "You want to be known differently," she whispered. "Not as a resource, but as a relative. Not as a secret to be stolen, but as a relationship to be honored." The heartbeat in the soil thumped once, slowly and strongly, like a yes. She placed the leaf in a small cloth pouch and tied it around her neck. It rested over her heart, warm against her skin. "Thank you," she said. For a moment, the entire canopy rustled, waves of sound moving from trunk to trunk, leaf to leaf. It sounded like distant applause, or rain far away. In that layered whisper, she almost thought she heard words. Remember. Make them remember. When she stepped back through the archway of roots, the world felt lighter. The forest sounds returned gradually, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves brushing against each other. The air smelled more familiar again. Yago was waiting exactly where she had left him, leaning against a tree, arms crossed. When he saw her, his shoulders relaxed in visible relief. "You came back," he said. "I promised," she replied, voice hoarse but steady, "and I think it let me." "You look like someone who has aged 10 years in a few hours," he said gently. "I feel like someone who has lived 100 lives in one afternoon," she answered. Back in Arasi's village, there were no dramatic celebrations. No one gasped in shock when she said she had seen the tree. They simply listened. They understood that the real story would be told not in that moment, but in what she did next. Before she left, Arasi pulled her aside. "The tree does not want to be turned into a shrine or a tourist attraction," she said calmly. "It does not want buses full of people arriving with phones and snacks and plastic bottles. It wants you to carry its story into your world and let that story work like roots." "Roots?" Elena asked. "Yes," Arasi said, "invisible at first, but holding the soil together. When Elena returned to the city, everything looked slightly wrong, as if it had been rearranged while she was gone. Buildings seemed heavier, the sky smaller, the trees lining the sidewalks more fragile and important than before. The noise pressed against her like a physical force. In her apartment, she placed the pouch with the leaf beside a photograph of her grandfather. For a long moment, she simply stood there, hand resting over both. "I found it," she said softly, "and it found me. I think you're part of its memory now in a different way than before." Her work at the research institute changed after that. When colleagues asked if she had found anything promising for new drugs, she did not lie. She simply answered differently. "I found something more complex than a pill," she said. "I found a story about how we relate to the forest. I found a reminder that if we treat it only as a warehouse of ingredients, we will destroy the very thing that keeps us alive." Half of them rolled their eyes or gave polite smiles. The other half listened more closely than they let on. She started writing, not just scientific papers, but articles, essays, scripts. She created a series of videos for young people explaining how forests communicate through fungal networks, how they regulate climate, how they support unseen worlds of microbes and insects and invisible flows of water. Within those facts, she wove the story of a great tree deep in the Amazon that remembers everything. She never named it, never gave coordinates. That was not the point. The point was to invite people to imagine that every forest has its own Ybá Kaîra, its own memory. The videos spread. Students shared them with friends. Teachers played them in classrooms. Activists quoted parts of them in speeches and posters. The forest remembers. Do we? Artists drew illustrations and murals, vast trees whose roots tangled with highways, whose leaves turned into city skylines as they rose, reminding passers-by that the two worlds were not separate. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you heard the story too. Perhaps you came across it while scrolling on your phone late at night, lying in bed, the room lit only by the cold glow of the screen. Perhaps a friend sent you a link saying, "Watch this, it's beautiful and strange." Perhaps you're hearing it now in the form of this very video, the narrator's voice carrying the story across time and distance into your ears. As you listen, you might have doubts. A tree that heals, that connects heaven and earth, that shelters spirits and preserves the memory of the forest. It sounds like legend, like something from a myth. And yet your rational mind knows this. Forests already heal in ways we can measure. They absorb carbon dioxide, release oxygen, cool the air. They filter water. They hold soil in place. They host countless species, some of which have given us medicines that save lives. Science has even shown that trees communicate through networks of fungi, sending signals and nutrients to one another, like neurons in a brain. So is it so hard to imagine that in some way trees remember? Remember fire, remember rain, remember the footsteps of those who walked beneath them, remember the songs and the chainsaws. Maybe Ybá Kaîra is one particular tree. Maybe it is a name for something larger, the spirit of all trees, all forests, all living networks that bind the earth together. The details matter less than the question it leaves you with. What kind of memory are you leaving in the forest? When someone burns a patch of jungle to graze cattle, that becomes a memory. When someone risks their life to fight that fire, that too becomes a memory. When you choose what to buy, how to move, who to support, your choices ripple outward and become echoes in places you may never see. Elena never became famous as the woman who discovered a miracle cure, but she became known, in certain circles, as the scientist who spoke of forests as relatives rather than resources. She worked with indigenous leaders to push for legal protections that recognized ecosystems as having rights. She sat at tables with lawyers and activists and argued that protecting the Amazon was as much about honoring old stories as it was about preserving biodiversity charts. Years later, she returned to the river and to Arachi's village. Iago was older, hair silver at the temples. Arachi walked slower, leaning on a carved stick. The children she had once seen playing by the water were now young adults, some preparing to become new keepers of stories. "You kept your promise," Arachi told her by the fire. "We heard that your stories travel far. The forest hears echoes of them carried in the wind from distant cities." "Far is never far enough," Elena replied. "The threats are bigger now, but so is the number of people who care." She did not ask to see Ybá Kaîra again. She did not need proof. The leaf in its pouch had faded somewhat, its glow dimmer, but its presence remained, a steady warmth against her chest. "If I go back to the clearing now," she said, "it would be more for me than for the tree, and that is not the way." "Wisdom," Arachi said, eyes crinkling. "Knowing when not to return is also a way of honoring a place." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. "Do you think it forgave him?" Elena asked quietly, staring at the fire. "My grandfather." "The tree does not forgive the way we do," Arachi answered. "It does not forget. Memory is its nature. But memory is not fixed like stone. When new stories are added, old memories change shape. Your grandfather's regret, your promise, your work, they are all part of its memory now. The wound is still there, but so is the healing that came afterward." Elena looked up at the sky. Above the dark silhouette of the trees, countless stars shone. One moved, a meteor tracing a bright line before disappearing. "Maybe that is what healing really is," she said. "Not erasing the wound, but weaving it into something larger so that it no longer defines everything, but becomes one chapter in a longer story." "Now you are thinking like a tree," Arachi replied. Somewhere far from that fire, Ybá Kaîra stood in its clearing, branches raised to the night sky. Its roots drank from waters that had flowed since before any human name. Its leaves trembled slightly in a breeze that carried the distant scent of smoke from cities, the salt of oceans, the metallic tang of machines. Inside its vast, slow mind, memories moved like constellations. The first dawn, the child digging upward, the voices of vanished tribes, the bite of steel, the apologies of a man named João, the touch of his granddaughter's hand, the sound of your breath. Right now, as you listen to this story and imagine the tree, it dreams on time scales we barely understand. In one dream, flames consume the forest, leaving blackened pillars where there were once trunks. In another, the forest regrows after fire, guided by those who finally learned to read the book they almost destroyed. In another, children in cities far away plant trees, not as decorations but as acts of connection. In one such dream, a child walks through a small urban park, stops under a young tree, and puts both hands on the bark. They close their eyes and whisper, "I heard there is a tree in the Amazon that remembers everything. If you know it, please tell it I'm trying to help." The wind stirs, leaves rustle. Somewhere in the deep forest, a single leaf falls from a very old tree, spinning slowly down to rest on rich, dark soil. The tree remembers, and if you carry this story with you, if it changes even one choice you make, one conversation you have, one way you vote, one way you look at a tree on your street, then you are no longer just a listener. You have become part of the memory too.